All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and real quick, let's clear the throat for all you fans of that, and take a sip of the old Sasquatch coffee. All right, speaking of that, first and foremost, got a couple T-shirts sent out there to you-know-who won this month's free giveaway here on PacWest Bigfoot. And also, just so you know, coming up in not February. February I'll be giving away a free hoodie from PacWest Bigfoot. But actually March I've got something special. It's going to be really, really awesome. To accompany a T-shirt, I got a little something special from the Sasquatch Coffee Company, or squatchcoffee.com. And I got a little something I'm going to be giving away here in March for that. So I want to say real quick, thank you very much, Gunner. Out there at the owner of Sasquatch Coffee. Thank you so much, man, for being a good friend and such a researcher. You and Shane out there on the Olympia project is just awesome, man. It's good stuff. So, with that, let's get into this week's encounter story. I don't have any other news anyways. Just want to get out there and have you guys have a great weekend, a wonderful weekend, and let's get into it. The Bigfoot of Kings Valley Road. Bigfoot raids local farm. My wife and I were Northern California locals at the time of the incident. I was a part-time farmer and a full-time security guard at the time too when a Bigfoot was raiding our farm and other farms around the area back in the late 90s. This took place just on the outskirts of Crescent City, California, literally right next to the Redwood Forest, where these massive and gigantic creatures live and thrive, apparently. I will say this. They are scary things, and we are glad we are back in the city again. Here's what happened to us. The Bigfoot of Kings Valley Road. It was more for fun than anything else, but I had soaked in a little money into a blueberry farm. Okay, not really a farm, more like a small grove. It was enough back then, however, to give us a decent little side income for a few weeks or so out of the year, for as long as we were there. At least that's what we thought. Not a hop, skip, and a jump down the road from us at the time was a much larger farm, of course. One that is still there today, from what we understand. I am not sure they had any of the same incidents or experiences my family and my neighbors did with these Bigfoot animals or creatures, but we did, and it was not fun at all. Matter of fact, it was downright scary and frightening. I am a true believer because I've seen them, and my wife did, up close and personal. They are scary and something to truly be aware of, especially when either out and about in the Redwood National Forest or simply anywhere on the outskirts of a forest in the Pacific Northwest, for that matter. It started not even a few months, if I remember correctly, after relocating to Northern California just outside of Crescent City, but within the city limits. The wife and I had decided to give blueberry farming a try. Well, mostly her. I worked full-time at night as a security guard for a local company. By the way, I have a friend with a great encounter he'll share with you too. We'd try it though. Take over a small grove of two types of blueberries, Northern Highbush and Dukes. This farm was literally right across the street, I guess you could say, from the Redwood Forest. Literally, the forest started right across the street from us. The wife and I loved the NorCal area for some time. Being from Gold Beach, Oregon originally, we spent a lot of time when we were dating visiting the Crescent City area and the Redwood Forest. We had heard the stories of Bigfoot. It's not like we were, we are from the land of Oz. Everyone in the Pacific Northwest has probably heard the stories. My personal thoughts on the subject were that I had none. But that all changed as my wife and I had 3 experiences, visuals actually, of these creatures, not to mention the vocalizations. I will start with the first and go to the last before we decide to call it quits and move. Before we decided to call it quits and move with the company to Washington. And not for the reason you might be thinking. At least that's not the only reason. Did you hear that? Yes, it would be a few months or so before the first visual, but what led up to that experience I can say I should have seen coming. It was not even a few weeks into being in the new home we were leasing the property and land. It cost us a pretty penny, but it was worth it. My wife ended up with a rather substantial inheritance at that point, and our dream of blueberries and the tallest trees in the world could and would become a reality for us. It was my wife who first heard the weirdest sounds we would ever hear in our lives just a couple, 2, 3 weeks after moving in. They came from the opposite side of the road and seemed to be pretty deep into the Redwood Forest itself. They were loud, screaming, or hollering like sounds. She was awakened by them that first late spring, early summer on the property. We had been getting some of the farming done before I started my new job in about 2 weeks from that point. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, but she woke up and listened to the sound. She woke up and listened to the sounds, then immediately woke me up. I heard one. After that, it completely stopped. She swore she heard at least 2 long-winded hollers that seriously had her a little freaked out. I have to admit, I heard it, and that one was pretty crazy. The next night and a few nights after that, the same sound came from deep in the forest. A couple of those evenings we were spent out on the porch listening intently, all the while talking about what we thought it might be. I will admit the subject of Bigfoot did come up, and we considered the possibility going forward, especially about 3 weeks later when I would see one. The road crossing. I had started my night job as a supervisor and security guard with a nationwide company that had business contracts in and around Crescent City. My hours were crazy that first week, and the day before my first weekend off, I was sent home early with homework. Trust me, I was not looking forward to all that reading. But I was on salary, and that is simply what happens. However, I did get off early. It was about 2 a.m. when I turned onto Kings Valley Road. We lived, as I mentioned, on a decent-sized piece of property on which we were running a small boutique blueberry farm. Of course, being a little loose of a term, I suppose. We lived near a bend in the road, about 3/4 the way up the road itself. I was approaching the bend when I spotted something or someone on 2 legs literally walk right out in front of me, up the embankment and on and into the forest. I guess I can be a little bit more descriptive here. It was raining lightly and pretty windy, so I was not driving all that fast. I was just under the speed limit before I hit the bend. As I approached, a huge dark figure stepped from the left and took maybe 2 or 3 steps and crossed over the road and up the side of the embankment and disappeared into the trees. I knew as I approached where it crossed, I got a better look as I came down to a slow roll. I soon realized this was probably a person at first, as it was on 2 legs. But they were massive in stature and build, bulky and tall for sure. By the time I pulled up to where it had crossed, I was almost sure it was not, however, a person. It could not have been. That thing looked as though it had stepped right into the forest. There's an embankment on the right side of the road. There was no way a person could cross the road that fast, that graceful, and take 1 step as it did up the embankment and disappear into the trees. Feeling nervous at that point, I sped up and got home in time to see my wife still standing out on the porch of all things in the middle of the night. She immediately came out to meet me, wind, rain, and all. She was excited and a little slightly freaked out about hearing more howls and screams from 3 different sides of the property this time. I walked her back into the house and we both made and drank some tea before heading off to bed. But the whole conversation was about her hearing this crazy howling and screaming, and then it was all about what I'd seen minutes before. It was huge, dark, and literally faster than anything I'd ever seen in my life. It was real. I did ask a few nondescript individuals in the farmers' markets that weekend about anything weird and out of the way. Of course, I got the Bigfoot answer a couple of times, but these were from people I sure thought weed would be legal soon, so I was not sure I could trust them so much. No offense meant, but credibility is credibility, and that is what I wanted to hear from, credible sources. I did introduce myself briefly to a neighbor who had a much larger and successful farm down the road, but I could not get up the courage to ask them about the subject, let alone tell them what I saw and what we'd heard up to that point. I guess I was just too nervous. Face in the window. A few weeks had passed, and we heard the howling at least three more times, I recall. Once it was rather close, so close we jumped out of bed and headed outside with a gun in hand. But whatever it was gone or so camouflaged I could not see it. But most of that following few weeks or so were quiet. That wasn't until a face in the window confirmed our worst fears. We were being harassed or simply bothered by multiple Bigfoots. They were literally raiding our farm. It was pretty late, we recall, about 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. Clear skies, pretty decent weather for the coastal range in the Pacific Northwest for sure. Anyways, it was late. My wife and I knew what we saw. There was no doubt about it. I woke up to my wife nudging me. I am kind of a heavy sleeper. She told me she kept hearing a ticking sound, or a tack, tick, like something tapping on the side of the house and the window itself. After a few seconds or so, I heard it too. It was like something tapped the window multiple times. It was completely dark outside, however, and I could not see a shadow or any movement at first through the curtains. We looked at each other and knew something was not right. Something was outside the house, and we both knew it. I was not willing at that point to grab my gun, but better to be safe than have an accident happen, of course. That's why. Besides, I was going to walk into the bathroom and look through the window there to see what was lurking outside our bedroom window. I got up, slipped quietly into the bathroom, pulled back the blind, and tad bit. I was floored. I motioned for my wife to come over quickly, and then she stood there next to me looking out. I thought she would faint at the sound she made, literally, but she didn't. However, she was scared, I could tell. As tall as the shape or whatever that crossed the road weeks before in front of me, it was now standing about 10 to 15 feet from our bedroom window. After a few seconds, it looked as though it threw something at the side of the house, which was most likely a pebble or small little rock of some kind. It hit the side of the house, making that familiar sound again. Tick! It was huge, and we knew it was a Bigfoot. It was semi-clear that night, and the moon was bright enough to make out the fact that this thing was at least 7 to 8 feet tall, dark, and hairy. We could tell, even in the dark. As it turned all of a sudden in the direction of the bathroom where we were staring, I swear its eyes glinted a reddish shine. Its arms looked to run down past its knees, and it was slightly hunched over, and no, there was no neck on this thing whatsoever. Looking at that patty film later, this thing, even in the low light of the moon, was a spitting image. I let loose the shades, and that is when I heard a loud grunt-like sound, and the heavy footsteps of this thing running off. It was a massive monster of a thing, is what my wife called it, and took me into the wee hours of the morning to calm her down. From that point on, there was a loaded gun in the house, and my wife started doing a lot of research about these things. The incident stopped almost immediately. Only the howling continued until nearly 2 years later, and around the same time of year when the crud got a little too crazy for us to stay. 2 years and counting. We did not do as well as we hoped with the blueberries. Basically, we kept breaking even. And while that is okay for hobbyists, however, we were hoping for better. And the fact my company was thinking of relocating out of state for economic reasons, they would ask me to come. But those were some reasons for leaving, but not all of them. In fact, a Bigfoot seemed to try and enter our house. I was out at work that early evening. It was a hot summer day, and it was still light outside, around 8 p.m. My wife was tending to the blueberries and then planned on locking the shed and heading in for dinner when she heard a literal growl. It came from the other side of the shed near a small tree line in the back of it. It startled her so much she literally stopped dead in her tracks, she said, and backed up slowly all the way back to the back porch of the house. She stood there on the porch, not willing to go inside just yet, as nothing was chasing her. She's a pretty brave woman, if you ask me. The grunts continued in the growling. She moved closer to the back door and even opened it slightly just in case. She said just to get inside and grab the gun. But curiosity did get the best of her, and she wanted to see what I saw that night. And boy, did she. After a few growls and grunts, there was a whistle from her left. That completely startled her. There were two of these things, and one was on the other side of the house, just around the corner. Whatever whistled was now running away from the house, though. It was starting to get dark, and if it were to come around to her side, she could have and would have seen it plain as day, but it seemed to be moving towards the front of the house and up towards the street. That is when she heard another whistle from the backyard where the original growls and grunts came from. That is when she saw a monster. She described it as around 7 feet tall, reddish in color, and the hair covered the entire body. Its face was not completely covered, however. It was pretty gray in color, and crazy scary looking. It was the way in which this face looked that scared her, even more than its sheer size, she would tell me later. The forehead was really big, but the eyes could still be seen in the glint of the light from the street lamp that was now on in the driveway. They shined red, and the face looked as though it was not happy with my wife being there, not one bit. Even its teeth could be seen. It was bearing what looked like large, whitish teeth. It huffed at her, went down on all fours, still making it very tall, however. It made an almost grimace on its face, and in doing so, she said it looked downright angry or mean. At that moment, it slammed its front fist on the ground real hard and made a short, bark-like sound. That is when she opened the door and slammed it behind her. There was a scream that she thought would shatter the glass windows after that. She immediately grabbed the phone and the gun. Seconds later, right outside the door, on the porch, she saw a shadow come up and then wander off. Time to go. I got there as soon as I could. Basically, I took my lunch break early. I would come back that night with my wife. Yeah, she went with me back to work. I did not blame her. She was not going to stay there alone that night. She told me everything that happened. I have to say I was really and truly floored with what I heard. That night at work, my wife was in the lunch area and sitting with a coworker. All the people to ask or to strike up a conversation about what was happening, he was one of them. But he was not one of them. But she did. And he had a ton of answers, surprisingly. Ronald, whom I will forward your info to, had a pretty insane encounter of his own and is a part-time researcher today. Well, not as much as he is, or as he was, because he's now over 70 years old. But he had a pretty awesome encounter in the Redwoods back in the 80s. We decided to stop the blueberry thing and head to Washington, where my company relocated. Today we live in Seattle, Washington, and while we still enjoy the great outdoors, like some who have seen these things, we are always aware of our surroundings, of course. I can't say that thing was going to attack my wife, but it sure did give her a scare that night. I think they are wild animals that need and should be given a very wide berth when you come across one or more of them. I also believe they are always around. Even today, once in a while, my wife gets that feeling as she had on the blueberry farm when we are out mountain biking, hiking, or camping. And that is when we pack it up and leave, period. Thanks again, Jared.